Right, let's get started on the zip bridge. So what you will need is your 4 zip bridge pieces, 2 exterior, 2 lining, and your longer zip. Just check if I've missed anything. Yeah, I have missed something. You'll also need a needle and thread. Mine is very bent because I never use it, or I resent using it. Right, so on the zip bridges, I've marked a 1/4 inch away from each short end, and I've done that on the right side for the exterior and the wrong side for the lining. Okay, so you can pop those to one side for the minute and grab hold of your zip. Now, before we go any further, the first thing I'm going to do is add some stitches at the end here, just to stop me accidentally pulling that zip pull off. I'm just going backwards and forwards over the end of the zip there, just to make sure that it doesn't come off. Also going to add a bit of fray check to the ends, to these raw ends of the zip, just so that it doesn't fray when we're working with it a bit later. Okay, so that end is fine. You could add a dab of glue instead of stitching over it. Doesn't matter, either way is fine. Just try and dry that a bit before it gets fray check everywhere. Okay, so what we're going to do with this open end then is we're going to fold these seam allowance, or these zip tapes, sorry, at a 45-degree angle, so that the fold of the zip tape comes up to meet the zip teeth. Okay, let me hold it that way, you might be able to see it a bit better. Okay, so I've done mine so that, hang on, I'm trying to do it back to front for me. There we go. I've literally just folded it so that the zip teeth go off at a 90-degree angle. Just folded that zip tape at a 45-degree angle. And you can see the zip tape on the back there, folded over. So once you're happy that you've got a nice neat fold, and I'm usually happy when I can see that the fold of my zip tape is running right along the bottom of those teeth. And then I'm just going to add a few hand stitches just to keep it in place. Now you can machine stitch this, but this is one of the few things that I do hand stitch so that it doesn't shift about while you're stitching it into place, because I think a nice neat end to a zip is very important for a professional finish on your bag. These stitches don't have to be particularly neat because they're not going to be seen, they'll be in your seam allowances, which is a good job because mine are not particularly neat. Okay, so we've got one side folded over and held into place. I'm going to do exactly the same on this second side. I'm just going to fold this and make sure it lines up. Yeah. So I've just folded that exactly the same as I did for the first one. The fold of the zip tape is directly underneath the zip teeth, and a few stitches to hold it in place. Just double check that those match. Yes, they do. Great. You want a nice neat end to this zip, I think. There we go. Right, that zip is prepared. I'm just going to pop my needle back in my pin cushion before I leave it somewhere. All right, so what we need now is our zip bridges back again. Just need 2, so 1 exterior and 1 lining. And we're going to place exterior right sides up. And then I'm just trying to think about the direction of my, yeah, that's good. Okay, thinking about the direction of my peacocks. I don't know it really matters because it's only a very small piece of fabric, isn't it? Right, now we are going to run some basting tape along one edge between those 2 marks that we made. So those marks at 1/4 of an inch that we've already made, okay? And we'll take that backing paper off, and then we're going to place this zip right sides down. You can unzip it if you like, it doesn't matter. And we're going to place the zip teeth, so those teeth that are at an angle, just shy of that mark that we've made at 1/4 of an inch. Okay. We push it a bit further towards you so you can see it. So I've got my mark here and the teeth are just this side of that mark. And then we'll press it down all along. Okay, we're going to add another line of tape, again between those 2 marks. Just have a look at the exterior to see where that is. Although it doesn't really matter if you go all the way along on this open end. Okay, take the backing paper off of there, and then we'll add our lining right sides down, matching up these marks. And if you've marked your centres, you can also line up your centres. Now, how we're going to sew this is we're going to start here at this mark by the open end, and we're going to start sewing. We're going to back stitch, and we're going to sew all the way to this second line, and then we're going to stop with our needle down and pivot and sew along the line to the end there. Now we are going to use, what kind of seam allowance are we using? Let me double check. Just the regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on this one, and our regular stitch length. Okay, so I'm going to start with my needle down so that I know if I need to lift my presser foot and pivot. Actually, this might be a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Just double check your pattern for this one, okay? So what did I say? I'm going to start with my needle down in case I need to reposition. I'm doing a few back stitches. Okay, and then stop at that line, lift your presser foot and pivot, and sew along the line. Okay, now before we do anything, I'm just going to double check how that looks, because my stitching did go a little bit wonky there. So I think it must be a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on that one. In fact, I'm going to make a note, so by the time you get this pattern, hopefully should have the seam allowance on it. Okay, right, so that's lovely. We just need to clip these corners. So we're just going to clip this top corner here, and I'm just going to take a little bit more out of the seam allowance of the cotton side. I'm not really going to take much more out of the seam allowance here because you've got the zip there and you don't want to risk that fraying. If you, if you are using zip tape that you know frays, maybe just add a little dab of fray check there as well. And then I'm just going to add, clip a tiny corner out of that corner there, just to help with having it sit straight afterwards. Okay, so we can turn this right sides out then. and you can use the zip tape to pull it out nice and straight. That helps pull the corners out. That's lovely. Maybe let's add a couple of clips or pins. Add a couple of pins in here just to keep these raw edges together. I'll do that all the way along. So we've got a nice closed end there. We've sewn that together, but this end is open. So all we need to do is fold these back along those 1/4 inch lines and fold them over. Okay, so that's one side. Just need to do the other side to match. So you're doing the exterior and the lining, folding them over and pulling them nice and straight so that they match each other and you get a nice neat finish. So it looks nice and neat on that side. What does it look like on the back? Yep, it looks pretty good to me. Just gonna add a little pin in here to hold that together. Now I would recommend having a little steam press of this if you're able to. If you're not able to, then that's okay, just clip it as best you can, and when you're sewing it, just try and make sure that it's nice and neat as you're doing your top stitching. Now I've got glass head pins, so it doesn't matter if I press on them, they're not going to melt. I'm going to take my pin out of that corner though, because I really need to get in here and make sure that's nice and neat, because that's the corners we've folded over. That looks great. Okay. Actually, let me add a clip instead, which will be a little bit easier. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch along these 3 finished edges. Don't worry about this long raw edge for the minute, but we're going to top stitch down this open end, along the zip and up the finished end, if you like. We can back stitch at the start and the end, and you can baste along these open edges then as well, just to hold them together if you want to. I think I will, just to make sure that they don't shift around. I'm going to use a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, that's 3 mil, and I'm going to use my regular stitch length. Right, I'm going to change down because I'm not going to get quite into the right place with that stitch length. So I've changed my stitch length down so that I can get into the corner, lift my presser foot and pivot. And then the same along this last side. Now I'm at the end, so I'm just going to back stitch one so I'm still on the fabric, and then I'm going to turn it so that I'm facing the raw edges, and I'm going to increase my stitch length to a basting stitch, and I'm just going to baste along these open edges to hold them together. Right, so that's one side of our zip bridge done. That looks great, I think. Now we want our second pieces. Now which way should these be if they are matching each other? Probably that way, but I don't know if it really matters. That's okay. Right, so all we are going to do now is exactly the same as we did before, but we're going to try and ignore the fact that we've already done it once before. So add a bit of basting tape between those 2 marks again, as we did. Not doing anything different at all, I'm just doing it on the other side. And then we're going to add our zip. So this time the open end is on my right, but again I'm making sure that the teeth are just shy of that line that we made at 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so the zip is right sides down on top of my zip bridge. Great. Okay, actually I'll leave it like this because it's a little bit easier to manage like that. Another piece of basting tape, and you can go all the way from the end on the open end of the zip. I'm just going as far as the marks on the long end of the zip, the closed end. Okay, and then we're going to add the lining piece to this as well. So lining piece right sides down, and we're matching those 1/4 inch lines and ends and raw edges everywhere that you can match. Do match. Okay. Now, because we are doing it on the other side this time, we're again going to start at the open end, but we're going to start here. So we'll start sewing at the top of this 1/4 inch line, sew down as far as a 1/4 of an inch. If you need to mark it, actually, feel free to mark it where you need to pivot. That will make it much easier to make sure that you're being accurate on this one. So feel free to just mark where you need to pivot there. Leave your needle down, lift your presser foot, pivot, and sew to this end, and we're going to stop at that line there. Okay, so back stitch at the start and the end, using our regular stitch length. Remember to turn that back down again if you did some basting, and needle down. Okay, right, so again, I'm going to clip off the corner here, clip a little bit of the teeth there, and I'm going to take a little nip out of these corners on the back here, which I find just helps them fold in a little bit easier. Okay, so we'll turn this right sides out. And again, we can use the zip to help us pull this out nice and neat. Okay, just gently, no need to be too rough with it, or too enthusiastic, as I say to my husband when he does something with a bit too much enthusiasm, something handmade. Careful, I've made that. Right, so I'm just matching up my raw edges again, as I did before. That's nice and neat. And then we just, oh, that pin's too close there. And we just fold over these seam allowances, or these marks that we've got here on the front and the back. Make sure they line up as best they can. Not too successfully there. Use a pin to encourage that little bit of seam allowance down inside. Yep, that's better. Okay. So these are a little bit fiddly, but I find that if you do fiddle with it, you do get a nice neat finish. Okay. Lovely. Right. So let's just give that a little press just to make sure I get a nice neat finish. So I'm just ignoring this first side of the zip really that we've already done, just pretending it's not there. a nice neat finish. Right, then we're gonna sew around the 3 edges as we did before, and then you can baste along the top raw edges if you'd like to as well. So regular stitch length. And take my pins out before I get to them. Right, let's baste along this edge as well now. Okay, right, there is our lovely neat zip bridge. You can do it up and double check that it all matches up. If it doesn't, you can unpick it, or you can just decide to accept it, quirks and all. Right, actually I'm really quite pleased with that. That looks great.